Life did not announce the day their paths first crossed. There were no signs, no music, no moment that felt special in the beginning. It happened quietly, the way most real things do. In the middle of an ordinary day that looked like every other day before it, she woke up before sunrise, as she always did. The room was small, barely enough space for a bed, a chair, and a steel cupboard that made noise every time it was opened. The ceiling fan moved slowly, making a tired humming sound. She sat on the edge of the bed for a few seconds, just breathing, preparing herself for another long day. Her life had taught her not to rush emotions in the morning. If she did, the weight would feel heavier. She washed her face with cold water, hoping it would push away the sleep still clinging to her eyes. In the mirror, she saw the same face she had seen for years, strong, worn, and quiet. There were dreams once, many of them, but life had rearranged her priorities early. Responsibility came first now. Dreams waited in the corner, silent and patient. She prepared tea in a small kitchen, careful not to make noise that might wake the rest of the house too early. As the kettle boiled, her mind drifted to the list she carried everywhere, not written on paper but carved in her thoughts. Bills to pay, groceries to buy, work hours to complete, family needs to manage. Every day had its own quiet pressure. Across the city, in a very different home, he was just finishing his morning workout. The apartment was large and clean, with windows that let in a lot of light. From the outside, his life looked settled, even ideal. Good work, financial comfort. A routine that many wished for. But when he stood alone, toweled around his shoulders, staring at the view below, there was a sense of emptiness that money never managed to fill. He had learned how to stay busy to avoid thinking too much. Meetings, schedules, deadlines, plans, stacked one after another. Being busy made loneliness quieter. It made memories easier to ignore. He wasn't unhappy exactly, but he wasn't fulfilled either. Life felt like a series of tasks completed without celebration. That day, both of them traveled to the same place for very different reasons. She boarded public transport, holding her bag close to her chest, eyes alert, body trained to stay aware of everything around her. The ride was crowded, as usual. She stood most of the way, adjusting her balance as the vehicle moved, her thoughts focused on the work ahead. She worked at a place where effort mattered more than recognition, where people noticed mistakes more than dedication. He drove through traffic, fingers resting on the steering wheel, mind replaying a conversation from the night before. Another reminder from someone close to him that life shouldn't be lived alone. Another suggestion that he should settle down. He didn't have an answer for that. He barely had patience for the question anymore. Their first encounter happened in a building they'd both visited many times before. Yet never at the same moment, she was standing near the entrance, holding documents, reading through them one last time, hoping she hadn't missed anything important. He was walking in while checking his phone, distracted by a message from work. They didn't see each other until it was too late. They collided lightly. Papers slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, lowering his phone and crouching to help. "It's okay," she replied, kneeling down as well. Her voice calm but slightly rushed. Their hands reached for the same paper. For a brief second, their fingers touched. Nothing dramatic happened, but something paused between them. They glanced at each other just long enough to notice. He noticed how tired her eyes looked, not weak, just honest. She noticed how distracted yet polite he was. The kind of person who seemed used to moving quickly, but capable of slowing down when needed. They stood up, exchanged a polite nod, and went their separate ways. That should have been the end of it, but life rarely follows the shortest path. Later that day, they found themselves seated in the same waiting area, separated by only a few chairs. She recognized him first, though she didn't react. She wasn't someone who expected anything from coincidence. Experience had taught her not to read too much into things. He recognized her too. It surprised him more than it should have. Something about familiarity brought a strange sense of comfort. Even though they hadn't spoken beyond a few words earlier, the waiting stretched longer than expected. The room grew quieter as people were called one by one. Eventually, they were the only two left. The system seems slow today, he said, breaking the silence without thinking too much about it. She looked up and gave a small smile. It usually is, she replied. The conversation stayed light. Nothing personal. Just observation, shared waiting, the soft kind of talk that passes time. But little by little, the distance between strangers began to shrink. He joked about how strange it was that important matters always required so much patience. She laughed, briefly surprised at herself for doing so. It felt easy, and ease was rare. She didn't notice how time moved until her name was called. She stood up, gathered her things, and hesitated for a moment. Good luck, she said simply. Same to you, he replied. They parted again, for the rest of the day. She stayed busy, pushing carts, organizing tasks, responding politely, even when spoken to sharply. Yet, in quiet moments, her mind kept returning to the unexpected conversation. Not because it was special, but because it felt normal. And normal, lately, had felt distant. That evening, as she cooked dinner, she caught herself smiling faintly, unsure why. She ignored it, focusing instead on serving food, washing dishes, and checking if everyone else had what they needed. By the time she lay down to sleep, the memory had softened into something distant. He, on the other hand, found himself thinking about the same moments while driving home. The sound of her laughter replayed quietly in his mind. He didn't label it attraction. He didn't allow himself to overthink it. But he felt lighter than he had in days. That alone puzzled him. Over the next few days, their paths continued to cross. Not frequently, not in obvious ways, but just enough to notice. A shared hallway, a passing greeting, a short exchange of words. There was no intentional effort from either side. And yet, something was slowly forming. She noticed that when she was around him, she didn't feel rushed. She didn't feel invisible. He listened when she spoke, even about small things. She wasn't used to that. Over time, she began to trust the feeling. Even if she didn't fully understand it, he noticed that being around her made his thoughts quieter. He didn't feel the need to impress or explain himself. She spoke honestly, without trying to appear more than she was. That kind of authenticity was rare in his world. Still, both of them remained careful. Her life didn't leave much room for hope. She had responsibilities that didn't pause for feelings. She'd learned to expect disappointment more than possibility. Letting someone in felt risky, almost irresponsible. He had his own fears. Past choices, broken trust, stories that never ended the way he hoped. He worried that getting close meant reopening doors he had shut for a reason. One afternoon, as they walked out of the building at the same time, rain began to fall unexpectedly. She didn't have an umbrella. He did without thinking too much. He held it out halfway between them. Looks like we're heading the same way, he said. She hesitated for half a second, then nodded. They walked slowly, rain tapping softly above them. The city noise felt distant, as if the world had narrowed to just the road ahead. Conversation flowed more freely this time. Not deep confessions, but small truths. She talked about working long hours. He talked about feeling tired even when resting. Neither judged the other. Neither tried to fix anything. When they reached a crossing where they needed to separate, both felt the same quiet pause. Well, this was nice, she said. He nodded. It was... They parted again. That night, neither of them slept easily. She lay awake, thinking about how strange it felt to look forward to something uncertain. Hope scared her more than loneliness ever had. He stared at the ceiling, realizing that for the first time in a long while, someone's presence had mattered more than his routine. Neither knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. Not the loud beginning that stories often show, but a gentle one. The kind that grows slowly, quietly, and deeply. The kind that changes lives without asking for permission. The days that followed brought a quiet, change neither of them talked about out loud. Life continued as usual on the surface, but underneath, something had shifted. The city felt the same. The noise remained unchanged. Work pressure stayed constant, yet their thoughts now carried a familiar presence they hadn't planned for. She noticed it one morning while preparing tea. Her movements slowed, not because she was tired, but because her mind had wandered. The memory of walking under the shared umbrella returned without warning. The sound of rain. The comfortable silence. She shook her head gently, as if clearing away something unnecessary. Feelings, she believed, were a luxury she could not afford. Still, they showed up anyway. At work, she found herself more aware of time, not in a restless way, but in anticipation. She didn't expect to see him every day, yet a small part of her stayed alert, just in case. When hours passed without crossing paths, she felt oddly relieved and disappointed at the same time. He experienced his own quiet unrest. Meetings dragged longer than usual, and he caught himself staring through glass walls instead of focusing on presentations. This surprised him. He had always taken pride in discipline and control. Now, his thoughts slipped away without asking permission. They met again a few days later, unintentionally, near a small food stall outside the building. She was waiting for her order, counting coins in her hand. He arrived a moment later, scanning the menu without enthusiasm. "It looks like we're feeding the same habit," he said lightly. She smiled. "Cheap food and quick meals?" "Exactly," he replied. They stood next to each other, close enough to feel presence but not pressure. Casual words passed between them, complaints about timing, jokes about daily routines. Nothing deep. Nothing planned. Yet both felt it. This was becoming familiar, and familiarity had a comforting weight. They sat on a low wall nearby and ate quietly. Between bites, they talked about harmless things. Traffic, weather, bad schedules, small frustrations. Each topic opened a little window into who they were without forcing anything personal. She realized he listened fully. He didn't interrupt or rush to talk about himself. He simply paid attention. That alone made her feel respected, something she didn't often experience in everyday life. He noticed she spoke carefully, choosing words that were honest but safe. There was strength in her restraint, a quiet confidence that didn't seek permission. When lunchtime ended, they stood up together. "Same place tomorrow?" he asked, half joking. She hesitated, then nodded. If life allows it, that became their unspoken routine. They met when time permitted. Sometimes only for a few minutes, sometimes longer. No promises were made. No expectations were spoken. Yet the consistency slowly built something solid. Their conversations grew warmer. She spoke about long workdays and how she learned to stay strong when no one offered support. He shared fragments of his life-career pressure, isolation that came with success, the exhaustion of being expected to have everything figured out. They never tried to compare struggles. Each listened with care, understanding that pain didn't need competition. One evening, while walking out together, she mentioned feeling exhausted lately. Not physically, but emotionally. The words slipped out before she could stop them. He didn't rush to respond. He considered them carefully. "It's hard," he said finally, "being the strong one all the time." Not many people noticed that about her. That sentence stayed with her for days. As comfort increased, so did awareness. She began to worry about what this meant. Emotional closeness had always come with consequences in her life. People leaned on her, took what they needed, and left when things got heavy. He sensed her caution. He didn't push. He respected the space, even when he wanted to know more. One afternoon, something small happened that left a deep mark. She was having a particularly difficult day. Work pressure was intense, and a family concern weighed heavily on her heart. She tried to hide it, as she always did. But silence has its own language, he noticed. "Do you want to talk, or do you want quiet company?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She hadn't realized how rarely anyone offered her that choice. "Quiet is okay," she replied. They walked without speaking much. No advice, no forcing cheerfulness, just presence. By the time they reached the split in the road, her shoulders felt lighter. "Thank you," she said softly. He smiled. "Anytime." That night, she thought about how rare it was to feel understood without explanation. The feeling scared her, but it also felt good, dangerously good, for him. The connection began to challenge his old beliefs. He had convinced himself that emotional distance protected people. Now, he wasn't so sure. With her closeness, didn't feel suffocating. It felt honest still. Doubts remained. She questioned whether someone like him could truly fit into her life. Their worlds looked different on the surface. Different routines. Different responsibilities. She feared becoming invisible in his world. Just another passing presence. He worried that he might unintentionally complicate her already demanding life, that his feelings could create expectations she didn't ask for. Neither spoke. These fears out loud, the turning point came slowly, without drama. One evening, rain returned, lighter than before. They stood under a shop roof, waiting for it to pass. She mentioned how she used to believe rain always meant delay and inconvenience. And now? He asked. And now, she said thoughtfully. Sometimes it feels like a pause. He nodded. A pause sounds necessary? They shared a quiet smile, understanding more than the words expressed. As the rain eased, he hesitated. I've enjoyed all of this, he said carefully. I don't want to assume anything, but I wanted you to know that. She took a deep breath. Honesty felt risky, but avoiding it felt unfair. I've enjoyed it too, she admitted. I just moved slowly. I can respect that, he replied immediately. There was no pressure in his voice, no expectation hidden between words. That night, the air felt different for both of them. Something had been acknowledged, even if it wasn't fully defined. In the days that followed, their connection deepened gently. He remembered small details about her life. She noticed how he showed up when he said he would. Trust, they realized, wasn't built through grand gestures. It grew in ordinary moments, kept consistently. Yet as closeness increased, so did the weight of uncertainty. She caught herself wondering how long this calm could last. Happiness had never stayed long before. She braced herself subconsciously, preparing for an ending she hoped wouldn't come. He struggled with his own hesitation. Opening his heart meant risking disappointment, something he had buried under years of emotional control. They stood unknowingly, on the edge of something meaningful. Neither of them had said the word love, but it was beginning to show up in the way they listened, in how they cared, and in the way their absence from each other's day felt noticeable. This phase felt fragile, like glass, beautiful, clear, and easily broken. And while they didn't know it yet, the road ahead would test everything they were slowly building. The warmth they built did not disappear overnight. It faded slowly, quietly, the way daylight slips away without anyone noticing the exact moment it becomes evening. Life did not suddenly turn against them, but it began to test them in ways neither had prepared for it at first. The change felt small. She started arriving later to their usual meeting spot. Not because she wanted distance, but because responsibility tightened its grip. Extra work hours were added without warning. A family situation demanded more of her time and energy. By the time she sat down in the evening, exhaustion wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. He noticed the change right away. He told himself it meant nothing. People get busy. Life happens. Still, the silence between messages stretched longer than before, and plans were postponed more often than kept. When they did meet, she seemed distracted. Her smiles came slower. Her laughter felt thinner. He tried not to take it personally, but emotions don't always follow logic. He asked gently one evening, "Are you okay?" She nodded too quickly. Just tired. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. Inside her, fear had begun to grow. The closer she felt to him, the more vulnerable she realized she was becoming. Vulnerability had always come at a cost in her life. Caring too deeply often meant being disappointed. Deeply too, she worried about depending on something that might not last. He had his own storm building. Pressure at work increased. Expectations rose. His schedule grew tighter. On top of that, voices around him started questioning. Changes they noticed in him. You're not as focused. Lately, don't lose sight of priorities. Personal life should not interfere with progress. He brushed it off at first, but repetition has weight. Doubt trickled in. He started asking himself questions he had avoided. Was he being unrealistic? Was emotional connection distracting him? Was he promising something he couldn't fully give? One evening, a misunderstanding cracked what they had built. She had told him she might be unavailable for a few days because of a family matter. He understood, or at least he thought he did. But when days passed without a word, his worry turned into frustration. He finally messaged, asking if everything was okay. She read the message late at night, drained and overwhelmed. Instead of responding honestly, she replied briefly, "I'm fine. Just busy." The words felt distant. He stared at the screen longer than he expected. The tone felt closed. "Cold," he replied. "Okay." That single word carried more emotion than either of them intended. Silence followed. Days passed. They avoided their usual paths unknowingly at first, then intentionally. What felt comforting before now felt complicated. When they finally ran into each other accidentally, something was different. "How have you been?" he asked. "Same," she replied. The simplicity hurt. They stood there awkwardly. Two people who knew more about each other than strangers, but suddenly felt less than friends. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow, angry at herself more than anything. She didn't know how to balance everything she carried. Love felt heavy when life was already overwhelming. He sat alone in his apartment, replaying conversations, trying to understand where things had started to go wrong. Neither wanted to blame the other, but silence has a way of creating conclusions without permission. She began to withdraw emotionally. Not out of lack of care, but as a form of self-protection. She convinced herself that distance now would hurt less than heartbreak later. He mistook her withdrawal for disinterest. Old wounds reopened. Memories of being left without explanation resurfaced. Instead of asking directly, pulled back to what followed was a slow emotional standoff. They still cared. They just didn't know how to reach each other without risking pain. One afternoon, tension finally broke. They met unexpectedly at the same building where everything had started. Familiar walls. Familiar place. Completely unfamiliar feeling. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. She looked down. "I haven't. You haven't been present," he corrected, not accusing, just honest. She swallowed hard. Speaking meant exposing fear she had spent years hiding. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted softly. "Do what?" He asked, care without losing control of everything else. The words surprised them both. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I never wanted to be another problem in your life." "You're not," she said quickly. Too quickly. "Then why does it feel like I am?" She had no answer. The truth was, she didn't trust happiness. Not yet. They stood facing each other, emotions exposed. Solutions unclear. "I think we should slow down," she said finally. Her voice barely steady. The sentence felt like a knife without intention. He nodded slowly. "If that's what you need, what do you need?" she asked. He hesitated. "I need honesty." Silence followed. They parted without resolution. That distance grew heavier over the following weeks. She focused on work and family, forcing herself into routine. She avoided thinking about him.
Ow.
But memories leaked through cracks she couldn't seal. He buried himself deeper into work. It's staying late, filling weekends with obligations. Yet everywhere he went, reminders followed him. Small things hurt thee. Most an empty seat, a shared song playing. Somewhere unexpected. A path they used to walk together. Both wondered if they had given up too. Easily both wondered if holding on would have hurt more. One evening, she received news that pushed her to a breaking point. Stress that had been building finally spilled over. She realized she could not keep pretending everything was okay. She thought about calling him. She didn't. At the same time, he stood in his kitchen, phone in hand, fighting the same urge, pride, fear, and uncertainty. One, that night. Both faced the same realization from opposite corners of the city. Love wasn't the problem, timing was, and timing, unlike feelings, could not be controlled. They had not ended things officially, but they hadn't held on to them either. The space between them felt like loss, and though neither would say it out loud, both felt the same quiet aches. Something meaningful was slipping away. Not because it wasn't real, but because life had grown too heavy to carry it gently. This part of their journey did not end with closure. It ended with unanswered questions, emotional distance, and to people wondering whether love could survive the realities they were trying so hard to manage. Time did not heal anything immediately. It simply moved forward, pulling them along whether they felt ready or not. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly stretched into months. Their lives continued, but without the quiet comfort they once shared. She adjusted first on the outside. Routine became her shield. Wake up early. Work longer hours. Speak less about feelings. Smile when needed. She convinced herself that this was strength. Keeping emotions controlled meant avoiding disappointment. Yet at night, when the house grew quiet and everyone else slept, her thoughts became loud. Memories returned without warning. A shared laugh. A calm walk. The way he listened when no one else did. She missed not the idea of him, but the version of herself she was when she felt safe around him. There were moments she almost reached out. When stress became too heavy, when exhaustion broke her silence, but fear stopped her every time. She worried that reopening a closed chapter would hurt more than leaving it unfinished. So she stayed quiet. He struggled differently. On the surface, his life looked unchanged. Work continued. Success followed. People praised his dedication. But something inside him felt unsettled. The silence he once welcomed now felt empty. He caught himself checking his phone for no reason, walking slower near familiar places, avoiding certain streets altogether. He told himself it was temporary, but he knew better. The space between them forced him to reflect. For the first time in a long while, he stopped running from his own emotions. He replayed the moments where he could have listened better, asked more gently, waited more patiently. He realized something that surprised him. He had been afraid of caring deeply, afraid of choosing connection over control, afraid that love might ask him to risk comfort. The distance gave him clarity. Meanwhile, her life faced changes she hadn't planned for. A family issue grew more serious, demanding not just her time but her emotional strength. She stayed strong outwardly, but cracks formed underneath. One evening, after a difficult day, she sat alone in a quiet room and finally let herself feel everything she had been holding back. The tears came softly at first, then uncontrollably. In that vulnerable moment, she admitted something she had avoided. She missed him. Not because he fixed her problems, not because he made life easier, but because with him, she didn't feel alone inside her struggles. That realization scared her. It meant the distance hadn't erased what they built, it only made it quieter. Weeks later, fate placed them in the same space again. There was no dramatic setup, just coincidence disguised as routine. She was focused on finishing an errand, moving quickly, when she almost walked past him. He noticed her first. For a moment neither spoke. "Hi," he said finally. "Hi," she replied. Their voices sounded cautious. Like stepping onto ice without knowing its strength, they exchanged a few polite words. Surface-level updates, safe distance. Yet beneath every sentence was awareness of what remained unsaid. Before parting, he said, "I hope you're doing okay." She nodded. "I'm managing." Both knew it wasn't the full truth. That brief meeting stayed with them. For her, it reopened feelings she had packed away. For him, it confirmed that time had not erased the connection. They didn't speak again for a while, but the silence felt different now. Less like avoidance. More like thought. He began to write messages he never sent. Honest words. Apologies. Reflections. He realized that emotional courage was something he had. Avoided for years, she began to ask herself difficult questions. Why did she believe strength meant doing everything alone? Why did she assume care always led to loss? She remembered moments when he gave her space without leaving. Listened, without fixing. Stayed without demanding. Slowly, her perspective began to shift. Growth did not arrive as confidence. It arrived as understanding. They were both learning apart. The same lesson, that love didn't have to be dramatic to be real, that fear often disguised itself as protection, that timing could be adjusted if both were willing. One afternoon, she made a quiet choice. She reached out. The message was simple. No long explanation. No emotional pressure. I hope life has been treating you gently. He read it more than once. He took a deep breath before replying. I've been thinking about you. I'm glad you messaged. The conversation restarted slowly, carefully, like rebuilding something fragile. They didn't revisit the past immediately. They focused on the present, on who they had become during the distance. She spoke more honestly now, about exhaustion, about fear, about carrying too much for too long. He listened without interruption, without defense. He spoke about pressure, about emotional walls, about realizing he didn't want a life where connection felt optional. They acknowledged mistakes without blaming. Healing didn't happen instantly, but respect returned. They began meeting again, differently this time. Less often, but with more intention. Conversations felt deeper. Silences felt safer. One evening, while walking slowly, she said something she had never said before. I don't want to run anymore. He stopped walking and looked at her seriously. I don't want to chase either, he replied. I want to stand with you. That honesty shifted something between them. They understood that love, if chosen again, would require effort from both sides, patience, communication, acceptance. This part of their journey was not about romance. It was about growth, about learning how to show up honestly, about realizing that sometimes love needs space to mature. They didn't define what came next. They didn't make promises. They simply continued, together but aware, letting trust rebuild naturally. The past no longer controlled them, and for the first time, they were ready to move forward, not out of fear or loneliness, but from clarity. They didn't know how the story would end, but they finally understood how it should begin. Their second beginning did not feel like the first. There was no rush this time, no excitement that pushed reason aside. What they felt now was calmer, steadier, and more aware. It wasn't innocence anymore. It was choice. They continued meeting, slowly fitting each other back into their lives. There were no big declarations, no dramatic moments that demanded attention. Instead, there were long walks, honest talks, and shared silence that no longer felt uncomfortable. She noticed changes in herself first. She spoke more openly, even when the truth felt fragile. She allowed herself to be seen during moments of weakness, instead of hiding behind strength. This didn't make her feel smaller. It made her feel human. He noticed changes too. He asked more questions and made fewer assumptions. He stayed present even when conversations became difficult. He no longer used work as a shield from emotions. He learned that closeness didn't mean losing control. One evening, she arrived later than planned. She expected understanding, but still felt nervous. Old habits die slowly. Sorry I'm late, she said. He smiled. I waited. The simple reply meant more than any apology. As days passed, life continued testing them. Work pressure didn't disappear. Family responsibilities remained heavy. The difference now is how they faced these things. When she felt overwhelmed, she didn't shut down anymore. She spoke. When he felt restless, he didn't withdraw. He stayed. They argued sometimes. Not in hurtful ways, but honest ones. They learned how to disagree without fear. When words hurt unintentionally, apologies came quickly. Without pride standing in the way, trust rebuilt itself. Not loudly, but consistently. One afternoon, while sitting quietly together, she said something that surprised them both. I don't always know how to balance everything, but I don't want to carry it alone anymore. He nodded. Neither do I. That was the moment they truly understood what they had become, not to people filling emptiness, but to people choosing companionship, their bond began extending into the small parts of life. Grocery runs, long calls after tiring days, shared plans that didn't feel pressured. Only hopeful, he supported her dreams, not by promising solutions, but by believing she deserved better than constant sacrifice. She supported his growth. By reminding him that rest was as important as success, they learned how to be gentle with each other. Time passed, years. Not months, life changed shape around them. Challenges shifted. Responsibilities evolved. But the foundation they had built remained steady. There were moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments when the future felt uncertain. But now, uncertainty didn't feel lonely. One quiet night, as they walked through a familiar path, she stopped and looked around. "Do you remember when we first met here?" she asked. He smiled softly. "I didn't realize that moment would matter." "Neither did I," she replied. "But it changed everything." He took a breath, not from nervousness, but from reflection. "I don't want perfection," he said. "I want reality, and I want it with you." She felt tears form, not from pain, but from recognition. "This is reality," she said quietly. They didn't need to promise forever. Their actions had already spoken. Love, they finally understood, wasn't about grand moments. It was about showing up, about listening on tired days, about choosing patience, and walking away felt easier. They faced life side by side. Not because everything was resolved, but because they trusted each other enough to face unresolved things together in time. Their story became part of who they were, not something dramatic that demanded retelling, but something steady that shaped how they lived. People around them noticed the calm they carried, the quiet strength of partnership, the way they moved together without needing proof. One morning, sunlight filled the room. She watched him preparing coffee. The moment felt ordinary, and yet it felt complete. She realized then that love didn't need fireworks, it needed consistency. He felt her presence behind him and smiled without. Turning around, somewhere between ordinary days and shared choices, they had built something lasting. Their journey did not erase pain, it transformed it. It taught them that timing matters, but willingness matters more, that growth can hurt, but avoidance hurts longer. That the most beautiful love stories are not the loud ones, they are the ones that survive reality. Their story ended not with an ending, but with continuation, with two people walking forward, aware of life's uncertainties, yet grounded in trust. A beautiful love journey, not perfect, but real. Life did not slow down after love settled in. If anything, it moved faster, more demanding, more unpredictable. The difference now was not in what they faced, but how they faced it. The years after they chose each other were filled with ordinary struggles that never make headlines. Long workdays, missed calls, tired evenings where silence felt heavier than words. There were promises they couldn't always keep and plans that had to change without warning. Some days felt harder than anything they had gone through before. There were moments when old fears returned quietly. She would feel the familiar worry rise in her chest, the fear of losing balance, of carrying everything again. He would feel the pressure creep back in, the urge to retreat into work, to solve emotions instead of feeling them. But now, those moments didn't end in distance. They ended in conversation. Not always calm conversation. Sometimes it was uncomfortable. Sometimes emotions spilled out unevenly. But they stayed present. They listened even when the truth felt sharp. One evening, after a difficult disagreement, she sat silently, staring at the floor. In the past, she would have shut down completely. "I'm overwhelmed," she said quietly. He took a breath. "I know, and I'm not going anywhere." Sentence carried more weight than apologies ever could. They learned something important over time. Love did not protect them from hardship. It gave them a place to rest inside it. Life tested them. Again, through unexpected change. A shift in career. New responsibilities that demanded relocation and sacrifice. The decision was not easy. There was fear in choosing a direction that would reshape their routines and comfort. They talked late into the night, discussing risks and hopes, doubts and expectations. What if it becomes too much? She asked. It might, he replied honestly. But we'll adjust. Not every answer was perfect. But honesty became their anchor. They moved forward together, not because the path was clear, but because separation no longer felt like an option. Time continued its quiet work. They grew older, not just in years, but in patience, in understanding. In forgiveness, they stopped trying to prove their love to anyone else. Validation from the outside lost its importance. What mattered was how they treated each other on the hardest days, on days when exhaustion settled deep into their bones, on days when nothing went according to plan, on days when emotions felt heavy and words felt wrong. Those were the days love mattered most. There were also moments of joy that arrived softly, shared laughter over simple mistakes, comfort found in routine, peace in knowing someone would be there at the end of the day. One quiet morning, as they sat together watching the day begin, she said something without realizing how deeply it reflected their journey. "I don't feel like I'm surviving anymore." He looked at her. Me neither. They had built something rare, not excitement that fades, not commitment driven by fear, but partnership. Shaped by choice, life continued to evolve. People came and went. Circumstances changed. But the core of what they shared remained solid. They still learned about each other, still surprised each other, still made mistakes. And they still chose each other, again and again, not out of habit, but intention. Their love did not erase their pasts. It honored them. It transformed pain into wisdom. It turned silence into trust and distance into understanding years later. When they reflected on how everything began, they realized something quiet and powerful. The most important moments were never the dramatic ones. They were the moments when one chose to stay, when leaving felt easier, but staying felt right. Their story was never meant to impress the world. It was meant to sustain people through it, and in that, it succeeded. Their journey did not end with perfection. It continued with effort, with grace. With choice, a beautiful love journey does not leave you speechless because it is extraordinary. It does so because it is real, and real love, when lived fully, speaks louder than words ever could. As more time passed, they began to understand that love, even when strong, never stands still. It grows or it weakens depending on how it is cared for. They had learned how to survive storms together. But now they faced a quieter challenge routine. Days began to feel similar. Wake up, work, responsibilities, rest. Repeat. Nothing was wrong, yet something felt different. Not distant, not broken, just familiar. Comfort settled in, gentle and predictable. She noticed it first. One evening, after a long day, she sat beside him in silence. The comfort was there, but so was a small fear. Life felt safe, but safety sometimes made her nervous. She had learned not to trust calm too easily. "Do you ever worry," she asked carefully, "that we might stop seeing each other clearly?" He thought about it before replying. "I worry more about forgetting to show it." That answer stayed with her. They realized love also required intention during peaceful times, not just during hardship. It was easy to hold on when things were falling apart. It was harder when nothing demanded urgency. So, they began making small changes. They planned time for each other without distractions. Simple things. Long walks without phones. Meals cooked together. Conversations that didn't revolve around problems that needed solving at first. It felt unnecessary. Then it felt essential. They learned new things about each other even after all those years. How silence meant comfort, not distance. How tired days required kindness, not solutions. Still, life found ways to test them. A sudden loss in the family created emotional strain. Grief moved in quietly, changing moods and patience without warning. She withdrew into herself, struggling to process emotions she couldn't name. He didn't fully understand what she was going through, but he stayed. He learned that support didn't always mean words. Sometimes it meant presence. There were days she pushed him away without meaning to. He felt hurt, but instead of retreating, he asked, "What do you need right now?" Sometimes she answered, sometimes she couldn't. They allowed space without turning it into abandonment. This phase of their journey taught them something deeply important. Love cannot replace pain, but it can walk beside it. Months later, when the heaviness started to lift, she thanked him quietly. "For staying," she said. He replied, "I never questioned it." Those words healed parts of her that even time hadn't touched. On his side, he faced moments of doubt too. There were times he wondered if life would always feel this demanding, if responsibility would slowly drain joy. One night he admitted, "I'm afraid of losing myself." She listened carefully. Then she said, "Then let's make sure we don't." They supported each other's individuality. She encouraged him to rest, to laugh, to remember what brought him peace. He encouraged her to pursue long-forgotten interests, to reclaim parts of herself she had placed on hold for survival. They weren't just a couple, they were a team. The years didn't make them perfect. They argued about small things. They annoyed each other. Sometimes patience ran thin. But they always found their way back to each other, not through dramatic apologies. Through effort, one ordinary day, while organizing old belongings, she came across something smaller, a reminder of their early days. She smiled softly, realizing how far they had come. She said, "We were so unsure back then," he smiled, "and somehow that made us stronger." Their love had matured. It no longer needed reassurance every day. Instead, it relied on trust, built slowly over time. One evening, as they sat together watching the sky change colors, she rested her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad we didn't give up," she said. "So am I," he replied. Their journey had taught them that love isn't proven in grand gestures, but in consistency, in being there when energy is low, in listening when it's easier to defend, in choosing kindness, even when frustration feels louder. They continued forward, not chasing happiness, but building it. Their story didn't end with celebration. It continued with commitment, quiet, steady, real, and that, as they realized, was the most beautiful part of all. Life has a way of surprising people. When they start believing they have finally understood it, just when everything feels steady, something new appears, not as a problem, but as a question. They had built a rhythm together that felt natural, not rushed, not forced. The days were filled with responsibility, evenings with quiet companionship. They rarely spoke about the future in big terms, not because they were afraid, but because they had learned to live well in the present still. Questions slowly began to form. She felt it during moments of calm, sitting together after a long day. She would wonder what the next version of their life might look like, not just emotionally, but practically. What would change? What would stay? He felt it too, though he didn't name it right away. A growing sense that they weren't just sharing time anymore. They were building something long-lasting, whether they spoke about it or not. One evening, she broke the silence. "Where do you think life is taking us?" The question wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, curious, honest. He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know I don't want to figure it out without you." The words settled between them quietly. They started talking more openly after that. Not about perfect futures, but about realities. Fears, needs, limits, hopes that felt both exciting and intimidating. She admitted she was afraid of losing herself again, of carrying too much and disappearing inside responsibility. He admitted he feared becoming emotionally unavailable, slipping back into old habits without noticing. They listened without interruption. There was no need to convince one another. They were choosing honesty over certainty. Soon after, life placed an unexpected opportunity in front of him. It was a chance to grow professionally, something he had worked toward for a long time. But it came with conditions, change, risk, and relocation. He told her as soon as he could. Not with excitement. With care, "I need to talk to you about something," he said. She listened quietly as he explained. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react right away. After a pause, she asked, What do you want? That question mattered more to him than the opportunity itself. I want a future that includes us, he said. I just don't know how that looks yet. Her heart felt heavy, not from fear of change, but from the weight of choice. She had spent much of her life adapting to situations without being asked what she wanted. This was different. They didn't decide immediately. They talked over days, then weeks. They discussed possibilities without pressure. What moving might mean. What staying might cost. How compromise could work without resentment. Sometimes the conversations were hopeful. Sometimes they were tense, but they never turned careless. At one point, she said something that surprised even her. I don't want to be brave if it means being alone again. He reached for her hand. You wouldn't be. That reassurance didn't erase fear, but it grounded it. In the end, the decision they made wasn't perfect, didn't guarantee comfort or success, required adjustment from both sides. They chose together. Not because the option was ideal, but because the partnership was. The change that followed was not easy. New surroundings, new routines, new pressures. She struggled at first, more than she admitted. Leaving familiar ground felt like losing balance. Some days she questioned the decision in silence. He noticed, instead of defending the choice, he stayed close. You're allowed to miss what we left, he said. That understanding made room for her emotions instead of